I'm Dawn Manafusco, and this is Right Because It Matters. And today we have Amy Morin with us, who is a remarkable human being. Amy is a respected psychotherapist, keynote speaker, and author. Following the tragic losses in her life, Amy wrote a profound blog that instantly went viral, which prompted her to write her worldwide best-selling book, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. Amy is proof that getting your message out to the world does indeed matter. Hi, Amy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, really. So I'm going to just jump right in and ask. Your story is truly inspirational. Do you want to tell us how your book came to life?
Sure. I had written articles as a side job. I'm a therapist in my day job, and I had written side articles on the side for a while. And one particular day, I wrote the article called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, and it blew up and it went viral, which led to my book. But most people had no idea why I wrote the article, and it wasn't until months later, basically, that this story started to come out. But when I first started as a therapist back in 2003, my mom had passed away suddenly shortly after I started working, and it was really the first time where my journey with mental strength became personal, as I had to figure out, how do I go through this grief? How do I go through this loss and still come out okay? I had seen plenty of people come into my therapy office after they lost somebody, and it might be 10 or 20 years later, and it was like the pain was still right there, and it was really hard for them to talk about. And I knew that in order to go through the pain, you have to go through it. It's so tempting to go around and to try to suppress it or ignore it or distract yourself. And so that was an eye-opening experience for me when I really had to figure out, how do I use all these tools? And I worked really hard to try to work through my grief. And it was on the 3-year anniversary of when my mom died that my 26-year-old husband died suddenly from a heart attack. And finding myself a 26-year-old widow, and I didn't have my mom, again, my journey with mental strength was a very personal one. And I held out hope that someday life could get better, and worked as hard as I could, and was so fortunate to find love again down the road. And I got remarried and thought, okay, this is my fresh start in life. And then shortly after I got remarried, my father-in-law was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I started thinking, this isn't fair. Why do I always have to lose my loved ones? And I'm going through all these things. And it was really in a place where I was starting to feel sorry for myself. But if I learned anything through all that, it was that feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to be helpful. And so I sat down and I wrote this list of the 13 things mentally strong people don't do as a letter to myself, thinking this could be helpful maybe to somebody else too. So I published it on the web sort of on a whim, never imagining that it could go viral or eventually turn into a book.
Wow. And it went really viral. It wasn't just...
It did. It was, it hit millions of views within a matter of a couple days. And then Forbes magazine, they said, oh, we're going to reprint it on our website. And it went over 10 million views on their website. And in the meantime, Business Insider picked it up and they got over 10 million views on their website. And it just kept going and going. It was incredible.
What do you think, looking back and what you know now, why do you think that, I'm sure the title is grabbing as well. Why do you think so many people wanted to know what not to do?
Yeah, I think part of it was the title. Back then, most of the articles we saw were all about what to do. I've seen plenty now that are talking about what people don't do. But and so I think that made it a little bit different. And some people were turned off by the title, and they were very much willing to say, why would you talk about what not to do? But I think it was an emotional thing where people just couldn't resist clicking. But then fortunately, they were then interested enough that they just kept sharing it and sharing it on social media, and wanted other people to read it too.
As a life coach for 10 years, we're taught, of course, to, and I'm certified, so we're taught in school to really focus on what the positive and work. And I never took that model specifically. I kind of really wanted to know what people don't want or what's not working. And then I sort of forgot about it until I read your book. And I love the example. I think you did it on the TED Talk where you say, you can do everything right, but for instance, work out every day. But if you're eating donuts on the way home, then, it's not going to stick. And I think it's fascinating because do you think that we just tend to forget about the bad habits and only focus on the good ones?
Yeah, because as a social worker, the same thing. We're taught to be strengths-based and to really
Mm.
focus on what people are already doing well.
Right.
And while I think there's definitely a lot of value in that, I think we shouldn't just ignore the fact that people are still doing some of these bad habits, because sometimes giving up just a few bad habits really can help you propel to
Yes.
move forward. And I always use that example about physical strength, or about if somebody
Mm.
wanted to lose weight. You don't want them to just think, well, I have to go to the gym. And if they're not losing weight, to think, well, I have to go to the gym longer and longer, because we wouldn't stick with that. If you had to go to the gym 3 hours a day, nobody would keep that up. You'd want somebody to say to you, hey, quit eating so much junk food. And
Yeah.
then you think, oh, I don't have to work out so much. Life gets a little bit easier and you move forward. And I think mental strength is the same. You just got to give up a few bad habits sometimes in order to move forward.
Yeah, that's great. So you wanted to talk about the business side of how you got your message out there. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was so fun, because what happened was when it went viral, like I said, nobody really knew why it went viral, and it was a weird time in my life. And because again, nobody really knew what had happened, but Fox News had called, and Forbes said, after it went viral on Forbes said, "Hey, we want to interview you on camera," and then Rush Limbaugh read it on the air, and Glenn Beck read it on the air, and it just kept spiraling out of control. But nobody really knew again why. And at the time, I
Wow.
wasn't in a place to tell it. I was on Fox News 4 days after my father-in-law passed away. And I wasn't going to open the floodgates on national TV and say, this is
Mm-hmm.
why I wrote it. So I just said, I'm a therapist, and I came up with this list and didn't give them the whole story. But in the midst of all that, a literary agent had called me and said, you should write a book. And she didn't know the backstory either, and I didn't even tell her at first. And to be honest, I didn't even really know what a literary agent was. I don't live in that world. I was a therapist. And so I was like, oh, okay. But at first I thought, I had so many people contacting me and offering me all these things and trying to get me to, join and do all these things. And so I kind of thought maybe she was a scam. I didn't even know until I went to New York and I met with her, and I went, oh, like, you're the real deal. Okay. I thought, she was going to charge me money and then publish an ebook or something like that. So it was refreshing to find out that she was the real deal. And then I eventually said, hey, I have this story, but I don't know if I want to tell it. And because I'm a therapist, we don't usually tell our story. And we had talked about it. And she said, you don't have to, but I think it would give it credence to the people that have read your article if they then go on and read your book, if they then find out why you wrote it. And then we were fortunate enough to get a publishing deal shortly after, within about a month of when I wrote the article.
Wow.
I had a deal with HarperCollins, but it was again a really interesting time, because as the article still kept going and going, and more news stations were calling, at some point HarperCollins said, you have to stop being in the news, because we want to make sure that when your book comes out that people aren't like, okay, we heard all about you already. And so it was so strange to then have to start turning down interview requests and saying, well, no, I can't keep talking about this right now. But that's what we did for a while, so that then when the book came out, we had really saturated the market, and we were then able to go ahead and get more press for it. And again, as somebody who doesn't live in the publishing world, I didn't know a lot about it. So I thought, okay, once I wrote the book, I thought, okay, I'm done. And I talked to somebody who, he's written New York Times bestsellers, and he said, Amy, it's called the bestsellers list, right? It's not the best writers list. You could write the best book in the whole world, but unless anybody reads it, it doesn't matter. And I thought, oh, okay. So, and then it was really about, well, then how do you market your book, and how do you, and it's been an adventure figuring all of that out. And I write for a lot of different places, Inc. and Forbes and Psychology Today and Huffington Post, and it was all about blogging and figuring out how do you keep getting your message out there. Now that so many people had read my original article, how do I keep that content fresh, and how do I keep offering more content that has value so that people will be interested in reading the book?
Definitely. That's actually, I met with some agents, and they were talking about they want people with a platform now. Like if you're not very well known, or it's not the best thing in the world, and if it's nonfiction or mostly nonfiction, they'll give you money to write the book, but they want you to have that platform first.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was big for my publisher, was to know that I could still have an audience somewhere who was engaged and listening and talking to me on social media, and to make sure that these people were still interested in hearing what I had to say. And that was huge.
Did you like the selling part of it? Did you like the marketing?
Yeah, I definitely did. It's been a learning experience. It was 13 months after I wrote the articles when the book hit the shelves. And so it was a very busy year and a huge learning curve. But then to figure out, okay, now that it's out, how do I sell it? And it was a bunch of things between doing some radio interviews, some TV interviews, as many articles as I could write to get it out there and to keep that message out there without just repeating the same 13 things that so many people already knew.
Was that hard? I mean, let's just jump into the writer's block part. Did you ever find yourself going, I don't know where to start today? Or
Fortunately, no. Fortunately, I think because I was a therapist for so many years, so I worked with so many different people and had so many experiences with sort of explaining things in different ways, and have a lot of content that I can use just from, I can't, tell my clients stories, but I can tell some of the themes that people dealt with, or I can, if I disguise their information because of confidentiality, I can't tell their story or use their names, but as long as I don't identify who they are. So I felt like I had a big wealth of material to draw on, and then it was fun to sort of figure out, well, how does this apply to, say, the business world, or how does this apply to parents? And it's been fun to apply it to different markets like that.
That's fantastic. You're a great example of, I'm finding as a writing coach, and I have been teaching writing for years, people who are I wouldn't say just writers, but they really focus on their writing as a craft and who they are. They do hit some blocks on what they want to write about, but I'm finding that people who have these rich professions and businesses and experience, they actually say, no, I have so much to say, so much to write about, and people want to hear it. I mean, I'm amazed that it doesn't matter. People still want to hear it.
Yeah, I found that having a lot of different things, I teach psychology classes and I do a lot of different things, but then I'll get a lot of my ideas by going out and doing stuff. I think if I just sat behind a desk trying to think of stuff all the time, it would be hard. But when I'm out there and I'm teaching and I write one article and somebody will comment on it and it'll give me another idea of what to write about, and that sort of stuff really helps keep the ideas going, thankfully.
Awesome. So let's see. Next question. Has the book helped your practice? I mean,
yeah, it has. I took a break from therapy at the moment. My supervisor, we were talking about, how am I going to manage all of this when the book comes out? And we said, let's take a break, concentrate on marketing the book for a little while, and then go back. And so I did. The whole time I was writing the book, I kept working, and
wow.
Yeah, and so looking back, it was a very busy time. But I managed to then say, okay, let's take a little bit of a break and then figure out what's next. And when I'm going to go back, I don't exactly know yet, but I decided to take a little bit of a break for that reason, because it was just going to be too busy.
When did you work full-time and write the book?
At the time I was working about 20-something hours per week, and then I write still for About.com, and I had a bunch of other places that I write, outlets, and so I managed all of those writing things, and I managed still working at my day job, and then wrote the book too. Looking back, I think that was a crazy busy time. I had about 13 weeks to write the book. And
tell me more about that. So
it boiled down to, I basically had 3 days to do every chapter. So I researched one day, I wrote the chapter the next, edited it the next, and then it was off to the next thing. It was definitely a crazy busy time for me.
Did having that deadline help in terms of knowing you had an end point of when it had to be done?
It absolutely did. I think if I would have had 7 days a week to write each chapter, I would have taken it. And so, but knowing that I only had 3 days, it was, I better get up. I have to get to work. There's no playing around on social media or wasting a couple hours here and there. I really had to be focused. And because of that, I managed to get it done.
That's great. I talk to my clients and people about how statistically books really shouldn't take more than 90 days for the first draft. I mean, it can be much shorter than that. And then the editing can happen. And is that what you did? Did you do your first draft in 13 weeks, or was it edited and complete in 13 weeks?
What I would do is I'd write a chapter at a time, mail it off to my editor, and she would send it back with some feedback on it. So in the meantime, I'd be editing one chapter and then still writing another.
That's great.
Doing those sort of simultaneously. So we were pretty much done by the end of the 13 weeks. The book was pretty well shaped up.
Fabulous. What did you love most about writing the book?
It was so fun to take, those 13 things that I talked about. It wasn't anything I'd ever written down on a piece of paper before, but I think my years of therapy practice had taught me those things, that the people who came into my office who did the best and overcame the most adversity just didn't do those things. And And so I think that to be able to then put it all together in a way that just made sense, it was just such a wonderful experience to then turn that article into a book with real life stories that said, hey, this is what happened and this is how this person handled this. And that was just a lot of fun, and sort of make it come to life after seeing it as an article for so long. You know, it was a 600 word article, so then to turn it into a 60,000 word book, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love the stories. They really, I think it solidifies it, brings it. We can all relate to the stories, so I think that's part of the fun of the book too for me.
Yeah, it was just a lot of fun to then think back about clients who had those situations and to say, yeah, you know, this person really was a great example of this, and to be able to share that was a great honor.
Wow. You've got great energy, by the way. I can see how you actually live into what your book speaks about. You know?
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, being future focused, you know, and just, I mean, you have a very genuine positive energy about you, where I think that, you know, you've heard of like the stress of positivity, you know, always, but there is a balance. Like you said, oh, I wanted to ask you this earlier. When you said, as opposed to avoiding the pain and just being with it, for you, what does that mean, or how would you tell a client or someone to be with the pain, and then how do you know when to move beyond it?
Oh, good question. Because I think a lot of people, we get confused about the difference between being mentally strong and just acting tough. That we want to say, well, nothing bothers me, and I don't feel any pain. But to acknowledge your pain, because sometimes people will confuse that. They'll say, well, why would you want to be mentally strong? Isn't that like being a robot or ignoring that you feel bad? But I think it's the opposite. I think it's about being aware enough of your emotions and to say it's okay to be sad, but then you have to decide, well, how do I not get stuck here so that you're not sad all the time? And it's about, I think for everybody, finding that balance of knowing when do you let yourself say, well, okay, I'm sad, but I don't want to dip into self-pity. And so how do I not just sit on the couch and mope and say, poor me, and why do these things always have to happen to me? But how do you make sure that your uncomfortable emotions don't turn into behavior that's counterproductive? And it's really about knowing yourself and knowing, what can I do? What are my choices? Where are my thoughts at? What type of behavior am I exhibiting? Because you just don't want to get stuck there forever. And how do you dig yourself back out?
Yeah. Reaching out to people, I think, is the right people, not the pity party people.
Right, absolutely.
No, that's great. So what was the most challenging part of the book? Was it the writing, the selling, the thinking, the organizing your schedule? What was the challenge? I'm sure there was one that sticks out.
Yeah, I think one ongoing challenge for me, so I write for About.com, where I am their parenting teens expert, and I'm also their child discipline expert. And so up until really this article and the book came out, my social media, everything was all about my parenting expertise. And so then I sort of had to switch gears and say, oh yeah, I wrote this article too, and now I have this book. And it was about just sort of figuring out, how do I keep a platform engaged, even though some people might follow me because they have a teenager, but somebody else might follow me because they have a 4-year-old, but somebody else might follow me because they're a CEO of a company and they found me on Forbes. So that's been my sort of ongoing challenge, is how do I put out enough interesting content without alienating half of my platform, but at the same time with keeping them interested in and wanting to come back for more. So it's an ongoing balancing act for me.
I'm sure people actually go to you, maybe a Forbes CEO goes to you for your, you know, for this reason, and maybe they have kids and they benefit from that.
Yes, I found that.
That's cute. Anything else that you would like to say about people out there, or to give inspiration, because that you were, you know, in terms of, one, you never know where your blog is going to wind up, right?
Right. And
to do it anyway. So I get a lot of, oh, my writing doesn't matter. Oh, nobody wants to hear my story. And I hear their story and go, wow. And then there's two things. One, it's healing for the person, right? Regardless if only 5 people read it. But there's also the chance, and as you know, with everything happening in the world, even though there's 7.5 billion people, we still want more good content, more stories. And what would you say to someone who's feeling that they do have a story to tell, and they're just feeling like, you know, it just doesn't matter?
You know, I guess you never know what might rise to the top. There is so much content out there, but somebody would have asked me, hey, one of your articles is going to go viral, pick which one it was, I don't think I would have picked this one. I had written, hundreds of thousands of articles over the years, and I never would have imagined that this one particular, and there wasn't anything magical about, because people will say, well, how do I make mine go viral? I'm like, well, it's not about, the day of the week you publish it or the time or even the place that you publish it. You just never know. But a lot of what I had written was, with my therapy hat on, and I was very probably cold and stiff, and I talked about research studies. This one was really from the heart. And I think that was probably what really helped make the difference. Is this one I wasn't really worried about, well, I don't want to offend somebody, or I don't, I'm not looking to write something that's going to, lead to, I don't know, all this scholarly research or something like that. But I was just writing something from the heart about what I knew on the inside and just the things that I knew were truth, and put it out there sort of unapologetically. And the first audience that read it wasn't thrilled. I got a lot of people that were really angry that I'd write about mentally strong people, and that's okay. And to know that in order to attract some people, you're going to repel some other ones. And as far as my story, to be honest, I didn't even really think about it. I didn't even really think about having a story because it's my life. And a dear friend said to me, are you going to tell your story? And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, your story. And I was like, oh, because I really hadn't thought too much about it. And I had those thoughts too of, well, my story isn't anything particularly special. Everybody loses someone, and I don't know what would make my story all that great or all that unique or interesting. But I think because what I had gone through, so many people do experience to one degree or another. We all lose somebody, and so people could relate to that. So I think for people who are hesitant to tell their story, go ahead and do it. You never know. I still get emails every single day from people that say, thank you, and that was so helpful. So you never know who you're going to help, and to know that by putting your story out there, you have no idea who's going to read it. I get people from all over the world that write to me, and I had somebody from Afghanistan earlier today and somebody else from India. You just never know where you're going to reach people or how you're going to touch them by telling your story. And even if you don't get 20 million people to read it, if you get 2 people to read it and it helps them, that can make it all worthwhile anyway.
Wow, that's great. Thanks. That's fabulous. I'm totally in alignment with you, and it's great for you to be that example. I think it really helps. Is there anything else you want to mention about how readers or watchers and readers can discover more about you? I know you have some e-courses out there.
Yeah, my website is Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensedclinicalsocialworker.com. One of the things that I've been able to do is create an e-course on mental strength. I had so many readers who were asking me, how do I keep building mental strength after reading the book? And they said, I want more. So I considered that a great honor, but I couldn't do coaching to everybody that was calling me because I had so many people requesting it. So I created an e-course to help everybody figure out, okay, now what else can you do to keep building strength? So it's an interactive online course that gives more exercises and really helps people figure out how do you change your thoughts and what kinds of behaviors, and it's about setting goals in your own life. And I certainly think anybody writing content needs mental strength. I can testify to the mental strength you need when you're creating content and writing books and putting stuff out there, that you definitely need it.
That's great. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I look forward to reading more of your work.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.